Welcome to the World Cup Mood Board, brought to you by 99.94. Well, the ICC did everything they could to bury the start of this tournament. Technically, it's not even really the start of this tournament. It starts in about a week, as most teams seem to have been invited to that part of the party. But other people have been invited a little bit earlier to clean up beforehand or prepare, cut carrots, make sure that the sandwiches are arranged and that there's ice in the drinks area. But obviously, this is a qualifier. We all know what it is. And imagine if it wasn't, and the ICC actually opened a tournament with the famed rivalry of Namibia versus Sri Lanka, which has got to be one of the more random ways to start any World Cup ever in the history of mankind. And have a look at where this game is played. For those who do not know their geography, Kardinia Park is down in Geelong, which is fine. It's a lovely place. It's between Melbourne, just past Melbourne, out towards the west there. You can see Werribee in between. That's where the sewage farm is. So if you go from Melbourne past the sewage farm, you end up at Geelong. That's just a local joke more than anything else, but that's also true. Geelong's not a major city. You can see by the little yellow bits on the map. It's quite a tiny little place. And the way that Melbourne keeps growing and growing, eventually Geelong is just going to be a suburb of Melbourne anyway. So you could have just started the tournament in Melbourne, but we didn't. We started in Geelong. And we didn't just start it in Geelong. We started in Geelong on a Sunday afternoon between two teams who have no history at all and no real fierce rivalry or no reason to open up any kind of a World Cup together. The ICC did absolutely everything they could to bury this entire tournament. And instead, Namibia just blew the whole thing up, didn't they? So the first time I really studied Namibia was when they beat Scotland in the 2018 qualifiers. And I saw up close just how disciplined they were. They're just an incredibly hardworking, smart team. They play the dimensions of fields. They turn ones into twos. They steal singles. They field in packs. If there's a breeze, they make the most out of it. That's basically how they do all of their cricket. And it's been very good for them for a very long time now. By a very long time, I mean, 4.5 years. And they've had changes in that time as well, but they're incredibly, incredibly disciplined. And that day that I saw them do all of those things against Scotland, they beat Scotland, and Scotland didn't play as disciplined a version of cricket as Namibia did because they were a better team. And they thought they could get over the line the other way. Sadly for me, who was working for Scotland at the time, we did not. And Namibia won. Since then, they've obviously won quite a few key games. And essentially, they did the same thing again to Sri Lanka today. The interesting thing about all of that is how poorly they started this game. They were 95 for 6 after 15 overs. I was sitting there looking at the numbers thinking, if they get to 120, is that okay? Maybe if, there's a breeze at their back, they get to 130, 140. The fact is that they went completely beyond that and they ended up with 163 runs. And that was just absolutely brilliant cricket. And that was without David Visa, who is obviously their talisman and probably their most important cricketer and by far their best cricketer as well. He's the franchise guy, right? He's a late convert to playing for Namibia. He's had a big impact and, he was in and out in a camera flash. So it was incredible. And it's worth going back to those last few overs. So if you have a look in the 16th over, there's a boundary there in Chimera's over, which means that they go over 10 runs in that over, which at that stage in the match was quite important. The next over, Hasaranga is bowling a lot of wrong-uns when it comes to, I think the ICC put up on the screen, he was bowling 72 or 73% wrong-uns at one stage. And clearly that was actually picked. I think it was Bard who was facing that. I think it was Bard. I'm trying to remember who the batter was there now, who was facing that and clearly worked out that the ball was spinning in more than away, which is obviously not that normal if you're a leg spinner. So he hit with the spin. You then have a look after that, and Paul Karunaratne had a bit of a shocker. He's the fifth bowler, sort of filling in the numbers around there because he can hold the bat a little bit. And not only did he get hit for 2 boundaries, there was also the 5 wides in that. So he really struggled. And then right at the end there, you have Chimera struggling to really hit the cut strip. His over didn't really go for that many runs. But when you add all this up together, you start to go from looked like they were going to make 120 at best to 163. They made 68 from 30, basically from the moment that they stopped making mistakes and Sri Lanka started making mistakes. And what they ended up with was probably a par total. Although if you look at the 4 innings that were played on that pitch, you'd now say an above par total. But looking at what we saw at that point, it definitely looked like it was a par total. Some of this comes from the fact that Sri Lanka doesn't really have a very good death bowling lineup. So Namibia had 2 set batters who could hit and were not taking a lot of risks in their hitting as well. They were hitting the balls that were there. I wouldn't say that Sri Lanka were terrible, but I also don't think it bodes particularly well for Sri Lanka going ahead when it comes to death bowling. But from Namibia, it was absolutely huge. And I would say, in my mind, they made at least 40 runs more than it looked like they were going to be able to make. Of course, none of that would have mattered if Sri Lanka would have come out and smashed them everywhere, right? Like that would have been absolutely all over. And there was no reason to think that Namibia were going to put masses of pressure on them. They're a good, solid bowling lineup. They're not a hugely aggressive bowling lineup. They're not the sort of bowling lineup that puts you under a lot of pressure. They're the sort of bowling lineup that just don't make a lot of mistakes and hope that your batters do. In this particular case, they didn't start particularly well either when Erasmus brought himself on and bowled a off spinner to start with the innings, which was a half track. It was almost a bouncer. It was almost as bad a delivery as you could start when you had batted so well in the last few overs. You know, if momentum was a real thing, Namibia would have gone on to lose that game. But instead, they did pull it back quite well after that. I would say that Erasmus's ball, as bad as it wasn't quite as bad as the ICC putting up on the screen that he was a leg spinner. I mean, we did see him bowl off spin all the way through the previous tournament. So there was that as well. But they did bowl a couple of balls that I thought were a bit too short early on. Sri Lanka did a similar thing. The difference is that Namibia, being the sort of team they were, seemed to work that out a little bit quicker. But it was really a Ben Shikongo who sort of came from nowhere, wasn't in the last tournament. Remember, Namibia are, a new team to cricket. They're almost a domestic team in South Africa who happen to play international cricket on the side. They had Picky Yella France in their last 11 quite often in the last World Cup. Another non-white player who basically didn't bat or bowl. So there was a lot of pressure on them to actually show that they were trying to move the game forward in Namibia, and it wasn't just a game for 45 or so white people who happen to be good in club cricket. Ben Shikongo bowled really well, sort of short, bustling, got through the crease quite well, and was on a hat trick. And really, what was he? An inch and a half from actually taking that hat trick. I thought it was really, really good cricket. But if you look at what happens afterwards, Sri Lanka do actually pull themselves back a little bit, right? At that stage, they do get back into the game ever so slightly at that point. And when they do get back into the game, it looks like they're going to go away with it. As well as Namibia had played early on, and as well as Shikongo's over was, it did feel like something was going to change. And they actually ended up with 30 runs in 3 overs at one point. Part of that actually came from an edge from Shikongo's bowling that Zane Green, who's an incredible athlete behind the stumps, almost managed to get a hand on. But then in the next couple of overs, we start to see a couple of boundaries coming on. And this is when you usually see an associate cricket team struggle against the top level. It's not that they don't have the skills to put them under pressure. It's being able to do that all the way through. In this particular situation, that didn't happen. And so Bernard Schultz was bowling to Rajapaksa, who we know is now an IPL star and a very, very good player. And he sees him come down the wicket. He drops his arm lower. He bowls a lot faster and also bowls the ball a little bit shorter than probably Rajapaksa was expecting. Rajapaksa doesn't get much of it, holes out to the deep. What we now know is that Schultz's big brain bowling is essentially what meant the game was over. Yes, Sri Lanka continued to, limp on from then, but that game was pretty much over at that stage. And it was huge for Namibia to get themselves into that position. And the thing that they continue to do, even when they were in front, is they just continue to play the circumference of that ground. I know that's not the sexiest thing. There is some sexy stuff later on, but the actual ground in Kardinia Park is very much like Adelaide Oval. It's very long, straight, and obviously very short on the boundaries. And if you look at the two teams bowling, it did feel like Sri Lanka didn't really factor that in with their bowling. Whereas once Namibia got on top, they really did that. And I said this all the way through the last World Cup, and I've been saying it for a couple of years now. Namibia is a team you have to beat. They're going to put everything into their favor. They know they don't have a bunch of batters who are going to strike the ball at 140 consistently. They don't have 95-mile-an-hour bowlers, and they don't have mystery wrist spin or anything like that. They're just going to put everything into their advantage as much as they can. And they wait for you to make mistakes. And Sri Lanka kept making mistakes. They're kind of less like a cricket team and more like a really advanced spell check AI that can work out your mistakes as it's going. And Sri Lanka just kept feeding this tiny monster what it needed to survive. And Namibia had their biggest win in history. And let's be honest, one of the bigger upsets we've seen in World Cup cricket. I mean, we've had a lot of good ones over the last couple of years. But even so, even within that, this has got to be, in the top 10 or 15 upsets we've had in World Cup cricket. It was absolutely brilliant. And again, Namibia just continues to be the little team that can and does it again. It is worth mentioning that although this is obviously about Sri Lanka losing, there is a funny sort of secondary story within this that my writer Charlie Reynolds has picked up about Chris Silverwood. British immigration to Australia has a long history. Well, in some cases, it is actually the history of Australia, of course. And Brits have been moving down in the millions for a long time, and nearly 5% of Australia's current population is actually born in the UK. And so, you've had a few English cricketers move to the UK as well, a couple of batters, but who cares about them? But obviously, Typhoon Tyson was one who went down. By the way, my mother-in-law mentioned Tyson at dinner yesterday, which is just, pick your mother-in-law well, I say. And another one was obviously Harold Larwood. Chris Silverwood is unlikely to join those. And I'll tell you why. Chris Silverwood maybe has one of the worst histories of any English person ever coming to Australia. And I include many of the convicts who came against their wills when it comes to that. Back in 2002, he got the call up to play the test match in Perth, and his figures in 4 overs, he went for 29 runs. Then he got injured and played no further part in that game, and England lost by an innings and 48 runs in that match as well. That would be Silverwood's last ever test match. Fast forward a few years, and he arrives to Australia as coach of England. That didn't go particularly well. England, managed to lose by 1 million runs in almost all of those matches. And it was a horrendous series that ended his career. Oh, and he got COVID while he was out in Australia. And so the whole thing just went, completely to shit for Silverwood there. Here he is. He's rebounded. He's a new man. He's got a new shirt on. Things are happening. He's with the Sri Lankan team who just won the Asia Cup. Things are happening. People are very positive about Silverwood in Sri Lanka. He turns up and they're playing Namibia in the first game in Geelong, literally a ground that Sri Lanka, almost no one's ever played an international game in Geelong before, but Sri Lanka has. They've even got that in their back pocket, and Silverwood manages to lose that game in the first game of the World Cup. I mean, he must hate Australia with an absolutely special hatred in his heart. On top of that, not only did they lose the game today, they also lost Dilshan Madashankar, who's their left arm swing bowler, left arm slingy bowler. Not quite like a Malinga, but maybe more like sort of a Mitchell Johnson sort of bowler, who I talked up in a previous video as I thought he might actually be a handy player. Well, they lost to Namibia and they lost one of their squad members. And it's not like they've got many fit bowlers themselves. I'm not sure what Silverwood's current status is, but there's a possibility the way that Sri Lanka going, Silverwood's going to have to bowl for that team going forward. It's not been ideal. So that was the first game, of course, Namibia and Sri Lanka. Just an absolutely great day for Namibia. Probably the less said. I think most Sri Lankan fans are probably happy I'm overlooking the team and focusing on Silverwood's epic pain, because that was horrible. But there was another game, of course. There was also UAE going up against the Netherlands. Also, same venue, still out in Geelong. I think that the UAE have been a very boring team at World Cups. And they've been a very boring team at World Cups for a very long time now. And I don't say that lightly. I love the associate nations and the newer nations, and I get behind them. But what's the highlight of UAE cricket at a World Cup? Is it Sultan Zarawani, the man here with the floppy hat, getting hit in the head by Alan Donald and being sent to hospital? It's not much of a highlight, is it? And I think part of the reason is that they focused very early on this gray color. Sometimes they go with silver, as you can see as well, with their kits. Like, part of the thing about going to the World Cup is surely having a cool kit that the cricket hipsters want to buy. I'm not sure that's ever been the case with the UAE. The best UAE kit I've seen over the last few years is the one that they had with, I think it's an eagle on it. Even then, it's still gray. Like, put it this way, if I don't ask for a free kit from a team, I think that's a pretty bad sign. I've never asked for a free kit from the UAE. So it's not been good. But have a look at this tasty little number here. You got your pinky purple at top. I don't know, your blue. I don't really know colors, if we're being honest. The UAE say that this new kit is inspired by beautiful winter. I don't know what that means, but this is the first time that they've turned up with a sexy bit of kit. And to be fair to them, it did seem to mean that they actually played a little bit better in the game as well. Whether it was just hard to chase in this particular ground, we're not sure, but we did see that Sri Lanka struggled in their chase, and obviously the Netherlands struggled in their chase as well. But I'm saying that the difference here is that UAE have a new kit, and I think that's very important to note, because I want a free kit. So if you work for UAE Cricket, you know where to find me. But it wasn't just the kit. It was mostly the kit, but it wasn't just the kit. It was also Junaid Siddiqui and his reverse swing. In fact, if you go before then, obviously, they didn't even cross 120, right? We're talking sub-runner ball on a ground with some short square boundaries. You really shouldn't be able to defend that. But they really did build up the pressure, I thought, very, very well. And there was that period early in the game where I think they scored 37 runs off the first 4 overs in the Netherlands. And it took them about another 10 overs after that to double that total. That's how well that pressure was. And that was a few different bowlers coming together, including the young leg spinner, Kartik Mayappan, who I thought I had high hopes for him coming in. He got a little bit of stick early on, but actually came back beautifully well later. So I thought he did very well. But it was really Junaid Siddiqui, who I thought was bowling well even before he got the reverse. He got the very important wicket of Max O'Dowd. And let's be honest, if he hadn't got Max O'Dowd early, this would be a section about how great the Netherlands were, because they probably would have scored that total within about 10 overs the way they were going at that point. Siddiqui got him with a slow ball that I still don't really understand, because it looks like, I don't know if we need a new term for a slow ball, but it was like a glue ball. It clearly trying to bowl a slow ball, and it just hit the pitch and just rolled almost. I can't believe how low that ball went, but it was really his pressure when he came back later on, when UAE had got themselves back into a position where the Netherlands hadn't scored for a long time. Suddenly his reverse swing came all in, and he was really good and got the 2 big wickets in that over as well, that could have changed everything, and certainly got the UAE back in. This isn't a huge moment for UAE cricket, this particular game, but I think for a new team to be able to pull it back from such a poor first innings total, I think that there's absolutely no doubt that they would be happy with this, and not just their kits, but their kits are good. I just want that to be remembered. The other young Dutch player that I thought was worth mentioning was Bastelidi, who obviously was the player of the match in this. He's just waiting for Muku to realize I've said Bastelidi's name. There we go. He's a very young and talented player. I don't think anyone was thinking, though, that he was going to be the player of the match at this stage. I'm not sure he was the player of the match. I think Siddiqui, and there's another player I'll mention later who I think was slightly better. But I thought Baz's bowling really held up. They put him in at first drop, which was where I was hoping they would bat him in this lineup. I thought he looked really good. For a young player like him with as much natural talent as he has, it was great to hit the World Cup in this way, because, we could see it eat up some players. They got Vikram Singh opening the batting, who looked brilliant and got out early, and we'll get on to the other young player as well. But there's a lot of young talent in this side, and it was great to see one of them walk away with the Player of the Match award. And the reason that the Player of the Match award went to one of the Netherlands players, of course, was because of a mistake by a UAE player. Rizwan's drop of Pringle was the reason that this match was lost. Wow, other than the fact that UAE made no runs. That was a big part of it. And the Netherlands got off to a fly out when chasing no runs. But essentially, if we're looking for the big bang, it was that drop at the end. Siddiqui had Tom Cooper and Rolf van der Merwe out within, was it 3 balls at one stage? And then suddenly you had this kid who looked like he was on a gap year who ended up in Holland, and they got him to play, international cricket for them, kind of on a dare at a certain point. He's coming out to bat. He's still a teenager. And second ball might have been. He scoops the ball up in the air to cover. And what should be one of the most simple catches ever to the captain, Rizwan, is put down. It's worth looking this one up on YouTube later, or on social media if you can find it. Just to think of how many family members you have who would have actually taken that catch. I'm assuming, Kane Williamson's dog would not have dropped this. That's a COVID reference as much as anything else. But it wasn't just the fact that the captain dropped the catch at a very important time. It was then that the young wicketkeeper, Aravind, completely went nuclear in his response. You don't see many younger players reacting that way towards a captain. In the way that Aravind did. I mean, it turns out he was right, because, Pringle did go on to make some runs and things did change a little bit. We'll get to the end here. There's just a couple of short notes that I wanted to mention here. One is a tweet that someone... Oh, sorry. One is the way the scorecard appeared on the screen, which is slide number 9, if Morku's now panicking because I haven't said the title of it. But I don't want to say the title of it yet, because I want to show you what this looked like on the screen. Although it should be pointed out that Charlie has done a little bit of editing to help this as well. But essentially, Lofty Eaton was batting with Lecoq at one stage. And I think you'll find that that meant that on the bottom of the screen, it said Lofty Eaton Lecoq. Now, this is a sport where we once had the boulders holding the batsman's willy. So, we've been there before. But I did think that Lofty Eaton Lecoq was certainly something that was worth special mention. But also shout out to Charlie, who happens to somehow have on his phone a photo of me when I was very young, dressed as a giant penis. So I think everything came together here. It's also worth saying that we still don't have, we sort of moved on, I think, a little bit from Quinton de Kock, because we're so used to saying that now, as well as Nuroshan de Quella. But Divan Lecoq is a very good, a strong, a hard, a firm name, a new entry in cricket's weird lexicon of semi-sexual names. And Namibia, if you look at their whole team, they've got some great names. I'm not sure that Divan Lecoq is even their best name. I'm not sure it's probably on the podium. I'm not sure it's top 2. I think, Picky France is obviously, a very, very strong name. But Ruben Trumpelman is an extraordinary name and deserves a lot more credit than he gets. But let's finish it off with Tim Pringle again. Because before this World Cup, I said that the Netherlands would struggle without Peter Seelaar's spin. Also, I thought that Rolf van der Merwe probably wouldn't bowl as much, as he's getting on a little bit and he's not bowling as much in domestic cricket anymore. And that Tim Pringle, because he was young, would struggle a little bit. Well, that did not happen today. Seelaar's bowling was not missed at all by the Netherlands. Roloff took a wicket and bowled quite well, came on in the middle overs as he wants to. But Tim Pringle came on very, very early on and was bowling in the power play. And there are 2 striking things about him. We'll get to the second one in a moment. But I think he definitely should have been player of the match. I thought he was exceptional. He opened the bowling. He spun the ball early on in a way that definitely panicked the UAE batters a little bit as they had a look at what was going on. There's absolutely no doubt that he wasn't expecting to bat. He certainly wasn't expecting to make as many runs as he did. He made over 42% of his career runs, over 43%. I'm looking at the screen. Over 43%, which is over 42%, of course, of his career runs today, and helped Netherlands inch to victory. He wasn't quite there at the end. He was just dismissed towards the back end there. But I thought he did absolutely great. But yeah, you could talk about his cricket and how this young bowler / we have to call him an all-rounder now, did so well. But he's also joined just an absolute array of great Pringles with incredible hair. And he's the third Pringle that I am aware of in international cricket with a mullet. Obviously, Derek and Merrick, no relation, thankfully, to each other. Both had great mullets throughout their careers in the 80s and 90s. And his father, Tom's father, Chris, who played for New Zealand way back then, once took a lot of wickets with Pakistan with the help of a bottle top. Also had great hair, but in a slightly different way. He has one of cricket's great bowl cuts. Whereas if you look at Merrick and Derek, strong mullets. And if you look at young Tom over here, you'll see that he has a mullet too. But he hasn't just gone with a mullet, has he? He's then shaved the sides. And then to make the mullet stand out even more, he's put on some Harry Potter glasses. I think that's just, absolutely exceptional work from the young man. And, to take any credit away from Namibia on what is one of the greatest days in their history is just absolutely brilliant. But for me, the mood of the day is Tom Pringle's entire look, his entire ensemble, his entire essence that we saw out there. This was a great day of World Cup cricket, even if it is technically still the qualifiers. It was an absolutely great day of World Cup cricket. We saw one of the best and most fun upsets of all time, perhaps Namibia's greatest game of cricket. And then we saw a really squeaky bum game, a low scorer that came right down to the end. What more can you ask for? It was a great day for cricket, unless you are a Sri Lankan fan. We're going to be doing the World Cup mood board for 99.94 every day. And we'll be looking at many different things. At the end of it, if I have time, which I'll have a look as well, I'll try and answer some questions as well. And I see that a couple have come through. So, so much so that Muku's he's already all over it. He's put Gautam's question right across the top of the mood board here. He says, do you think the Sri Lanka lower and middle order holding out was a wise gamble? Trying to win the match, they took a hit with their net run rate. Yeah, I think because of rain and everything else, and because it's a strong group, because you've got Netherlands and Namibia in this group, I think you're probably going to want to go for the victory. I do understand what you're saying. They did still bat pretty deep in the game. I think they had to have thought that if one person had come off, they could have still have chased that down. I don't think you can be a cricket team of their experience and against Namibia and think to yourself, our best option here is to play for the net run rate. So I've got absolutely no problems with them having a go at that and moving it on. So I think you always try and win the game ahead of worrying about net run rate. They've got a game against the UAE and Netherlands, who have both scored about around 115, 120 runs in this, well, less than that in this first game. There's plenty of chances for Sri Lanka to get their act together and win those games. I do know what you mean about the rain, but I don't think they would have been sitting there thinking about that. They would have been sitting in the dugout thinking, we have to win this game. SLvNA said, do you think that Sri Lanka will go through to the next round? Yeah, I still think they're afraid. But I mean, this makes it confusing, right? I mean, I don't think there's, I don't think this makes it easy. I would have thought that this would have been more likely a result that might have happened with West Indies. I thought West Indies might have had to scramble a little bit more than Sri Lanka. But Namibia don't make mistakes, right? They stay on you. And that's kind of what we saw in this particular game. And Sri Lanka made the mistakes. Namibia will do that a lot. I think as the tournament goes on, we'll see the same thing in Namibia as we saw last time. Teams will make fewer against them just because they get to a point where they work them out a little bit more. But I'm not overly surprised that Namibia were in this game. I'm surprised they won it from the position they were in. After that 15 over mark in the first innings, I didn't win visit, but I don't know, is negative a potential Crickfist score on that? They're supposed to. I've just seen some questions about rain. Yeah, there's supposed to be some rain coming up in the rest of the week. There's supposed to be rain, I think, today. So there is a possibility that will play a big part in the rest of the tournament. That I mean, Hobart and Geelong aren't exactly next to each other, but there's certainly that part of the world seems to have a couple of forecasts for rain at the moment. So. It's even more important for you to win your first game. So Namibia are in an absolutely a great chance. I'd have to have a look at the at Sri Lanka qualifying for that because everything It depends on what games are washed out, if they're completely washed out and everything else. I wouldn't be sitting there if I was a Sri Lankan fan worrying about the games being completely washed out at the moment. I think there's a fair chance of those games still going ahead. Just see if there's anything else. The Outcast says the thing Namibia never looked like they were under pressure. It's kind of how they play. They're a really interesting team. They're very what's a good way of putting it? They just seem to all know their jobs, their roles within the side, and they push players into certain roles, into certain jobs. And I think that that can come unstuck because they don't have players that completely destroy the opposition. But if everyone's doing their job, it means that they're waiting for the opposition to make mistakes, and that's it's very rare I have seen Namibia win when I've thought they have played exceptional cricket. I usually think they've just played really smart, competent cricket, and they've got through. And I certainly think that was the case again today. I'll just see if there's anything else. AW Yang says, with Australia being predominantly fast bowling paradise, can we accept more upsets from the medium pace laden associate teams? I think Namibia have an advantage over other teams because they play in Southern Africa and they're used to faster wickets. I don't know much about Namibian wickets themselves, but obviously they play a lot of cricket in South Africa. So that's a huge, they have an advantage over, Scotland, for instance, and Ireland. So it's not, and they're seam dependent teams. A lot of it is about where you come from. These conditions won't be as alien to them as they are to other people. Even the Netherlands have 4 players played a lot of cricket in Australia in their squad. So you look at a team like the UAE and you watch them bat, and you were thinking this looks like a team who doesn't quite work it out. So I think there's an advantage for Namibia specifically. I'm not sure that seam bowling is an advantage so much in T20 cricket in Australia when you look at the Big Bash. And we've seen so many teams do so well with great spinning combinations. And probably Sri Lanka looked at its best today when the 2 spinners were in the middle of the game anyway, perhaps. So I wouldn't be as worried about that early on. But yeah, at the moment that's very fair. Another thing from Namibia that Ushants has sent is that they took all their catches. They took their catches. It's not just their catches though. There was a couple of fielding things. I think it was Shikongo, and I can't remember who else it was out on the boundary. And they were coming from 2 different directions fielding, but they were perfectly they were keeping an eye on each other, but they were moving so quickly and so athletically. You look at Zane Green in the field, you see that run out at the end. That's what I'm talking about when they don't make mistakes. They usually put themselves in the right positions. Doesn't mean they're not going to drop catches and play across the line and be bold and whatever, but they do so much of their cricket so without making those mistakes and doing all the 1%ers correct. If you have that. So I certainly think that is quite I certainly think that is quite interesting. Here's last question and then I'll leave. Gautam says, is it Gautam? Oh God, I've completely lost the question. Someone sent a question about hit the deck bowlers and now I can't see it. Gautam says that's what gives rise to 4 hit the deck left arm seamers. Yeah, they didn't play as many of their left armers. The hit the deck thing I want to go into. That particular pitch, I actually thought you were bowling better when you pitched the ball up on it. I don't know if that's just because of the dimensions of the field, because it's very hard to hit full and straight. But Shikongo probably bowled the best length, and a lot of the Dutch bowlers then came in later bowling a very similar length. So not quite what you would expect from that, but we did see a little bit of wobble ball moving around early on, and we did see early wickets as well. But thanks to everyone for their questions. We're going to try and do this every day. I can't promise I'll be able to get to your questions every day because that depends on my actual life. But the World Cup mood board is here to stay. You can see, look at the effort that we put. This is handmade. This mood board. Look, not just the giant penis costume that I have there, but look at the effort that we've gone into. Just $1 million budget for this show. But we're aiming to be around 2 p.m. UK time every day. Things might change around a little bit, especially if there's rain and things like that, although I'm hoping no games go too much later than that. But thanks for joining us today, and we'll be here for every day of the World Cup, looking at kind of everything that happens in this World Cup. Remember, go and support 99.94. Plenty of great content. I'm sure there's going to be a great podcast from the Sri Lankan team coming up very soon. And sadly, we don't have a Namibian one because they would have an absolute field day with that. We'll see you next time.